I would now like to open our third session. It's the final session for today. We will have time till roughly 1 o'clock, and then we will close this year's IPC. I have the honor of chairing this session, and I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished speakers. First of all, Ms. Karin Kneißl, the Foreign Affairs Minister here in Austria. We would like to thank you for the hospitality and the good organization of this conference. Then we have Mr. Thomas Meyer-Harting, who many of you who are dealing with the Western Balkans will know. He's the Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia in the European External Action Service. And then we have Ms. Theresia Tögelhofer, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Associate Fellow, Alfred von Oppenheim Center for European Policy Studies of the German Council on Foreign Relations. Now, we will give the floor to our three panel speakers for 7 to 10 minutes, and then we have time for an exchange of views. Minister Kneißl will have to leave us at 12:30, so in the second half of our exchange of views, we then will have to concentrate on Mr. Meyer-Harting and Ms. Tögelhofer, so perhaps the first questions could actually go to the Minister. Before giving the floor to Minister Karin Kneißl, let me just say that a lot of us in this room are probably happy to see a renewed focus and understanding of the strategic importance of the enlargement process among the European decision makers. This doesn't only apply to the European Commission and the European External Action Service, but we've also seen this new momentum in the European Parliament and across a number of national parliaments. So a lot has happened in the last few weeks in the Western Balkans. A lot more will happen, and without further ado, I will now give Minister Kneißl the floor for her introductory remarks. You can do it from here, you can do it from there. Okay. Sie haben das Wort, Frau Ministerin.
Well, a very warm welcome also on behalf of the Austrian government, if I may say, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and my thanks go to the moderator and the chairman of the Affairs of Foreign Relations. Many of you I've already met at some other instances. Some of you came to Vienna in early June, and it's a pleasure to meet the other ones whom I haven't met yet. And as was mentioned, I'm at your disposal for questions, but I apologize, there was an unknown visit when I committed myself for here. A colleague of mine, the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, will expect me in due time. So, during the Austrian EU chairmanship, we quite naturally built on the EU Western Balkan focus, which took shape under the preceding Bulgarian presidency. The region moved back towards the center of the EU attention thanks to concerted efforts by Federica Mogherini and the European Commission. In theory, we ought to discuss here today also the Turkish accession, but when we talk about EU enlargement, I ask for your understanding that irrespective of the national position of the Austrian government, I will refrain from doing so for the simple reason that the EU Council of Ministers last June noted, and I quote, that Turkey has been moving further away from the European Union, and that Turkey's accession negotiations have therefore effectively come to a standstill. Obviously, the EU and Turkey need to have a strong and structured basis for essential and multi-layered rapport, and I'm confident that with goodwill and cool minds on both sides, we shall find a way forward once Brexit is resolved and all its effects digested. One word on the EU presidency. Since the Lisbon Treaty, very little so-called presidency can do it on ourselves. What we can do today, however, is to bring Austria's presidency motto to bear, and you have been encountering through it the last 3 months. Our motto is a Europe that protects. Since taking office at the end of 2017, I visited every single country of the region of Southeast Europe, which is quite familiar to me. I've been traveling through that region for the 3 past decades, and because of my personal knowledge of the region, I prefer simply to replace the term Western Balkan whenever it makes sense, using Southeast Europe instead. Western Balkans was coined in an EU forum in 1999, and it has come to be quite established. However, it blurs the geographic picture and stresses the term Balkans, which in some languages and instances carries a derogatory connotation. I received many positive reactions in my personal encounters, whether it were ministers of foreign affairs or prime ministers or citizens from Sarajevo to Pristina, who said, yes, please, we are part of Europe. And in fact, language can be powerful. Words reflect realities and also help to shape those. Allow me, therefore, to use, for the sake of this exercise today, Southeast Europe, and please feel free to emulate that exercise. Whoever of you has been to the Philharmonic of Sarajevo, to the Museum of Contemporary Arts of Belgrade, which I visited recently, this is part of Europe. You will find any kind of art and the way people also enjoy performances, whether it's music, ballet, theater, literature, clubs, all that is Europe. And that's why I prefer to use the term of Southeast Europe. Of course, and here I come now to the general mood, I understand the skepticism concerning current developments in Southeast Europe, voiced in Paris, The Hague, and elsewhere. Nevertheless, the European Union cannot be complete without the integration of all those countries in Southeast Europe. My conviction is not derived from lofty principles or romantic dreams. And it's not just because Austria is geographically and also by demography, by history, linked to the region. In Southeast Europe, the EU is challenged by various threats, be it illegal migration to third actors. And all those can turn our neighborhood into a geopolitical theater. Austria, therefore, is an open bridge for EU member states who are geographically further away from the region. We try to familiarize them with the realities, problems, but also opportunities. And the Southeast Europe region holds all those. The region has been a reliable partner during the migration crisis and is essential in fighting illegal migration. Geography is a constant factor of history, noted the German statesman Otto von Bismarck, and how right he was. Because when geography and history meet, geopolitical analysis kicks in. When adding the geography of the EU member states in Southeast Europe plus our common history, it becomes obvious that the future of Southeast Europe must be inside the European Union. However, this issue eventually needs to be decided by the peoples of Southeast Europe themselves. In fact, over the last years, the 6 Southeast European countries did improve their mutual contacts somewhat, connected some of the infrastructure, eased some of the exchanges, and yet progress is much too slow. With each year passing, the stream of emigrants from every single country is swelling and literally emptying the landscapes of Southeast Europe. Whoever has been around All Souls, All Saints Day, and I visited many years ago with a Bosnian friend, one of the cemeteries in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it's very telling. The cemeteries are full, the villages are empty, and the parking lot, you see cars with German, Swiss, and Austrian immatriculation plates. And that was very shocking to me also to see the tremendous ongoing stream of young people leaving. Having been myself a teacher in the region for some years and being also teacher to young colleagues from the region who did their studies here in Vienna, I know that some of among those do their utmost to do something for their country, but they simply don't find allies in the establishment. The peer group pressure is strong, and the Republican thinking in terms of I'm a citizen and I'm not first and foremost member of an ethnic group has not yet developed to the degree possible. At the same time, the leading regions of this world, Asia first, they are taking strides in technological breakthroughs, challenging thereby ourselves. Our support for the region is essential. But first and foremost, it means for the six to formally or pragmatically recognizing and respecting each other's borders. By the way, you might be familiar with the fact there's a very useful distinction in the English language between border and boundary on the one hand, which is the line, and frontier, which is something else. As long as we have frontiers, we have uncertainty because it's like moving sands. Once we have a border or a borderline, we have a clear-cut mutual recognition where the sovereignty of A stops and the sovereignty of B starts. And we are right now also in a debate on that. It equally means ensuring decent public services under rule of law in every corner of this otherwise promising, and we all have to admit, whoever visited the region, beautiful part of Europe. The moment you get an employment because of your merits and your qualifications, and not because of your party affiliation or because of your ethnic roots, things will change. But it all has to be about meritocracy and not ethnic affiliation, not party politics. Public services will improve, hospitals and schools hopefully will again become reliable, emigres and foreign investors will start to stream back in. And I had the chance, whether it was in Sarajevo or in Belgrade, to meet some of those, my age group, somewhere in the 50s, who quitted as children against the backdrop of the war, or as young people, early study days. They made their living, they made their professional career in Austria, and they have decided to go back for the sake of doing something to their country of origin. These people are there, but they need our support, and here I come back to it's all about meritocracy, and it's all about fighting corruption. This presupposes holding up the principle of citizenship. Let me be even more blunt. There will never be certain ethnicity-based parts of a country allowed to normally deal with the EU as if it were a sovereign state, let alone to join it. Hence, maybe a few rules need to be spelled out more clearly. Honoring, certified, it means condemned war criminals is simply not on. They throw out the country of any European orbit. These are red lines, and they shouldn't be discussed. Let me cast a brief glance into the rear mirror. We are looking back on several years of slow progress in reforms in the region, in their path towards the EU, and lately there have been significant changes. Regarding both Skopje and Tirana, genuine reform efforts have led the Commission to recommend the opening of accession negotiations. The June Council acknowledged this progress and paved the way for opening negotiations in 2019. Sofia and Skopje have decided to put the common future before past disputes and signed a friendship treaty. Now the breakthrough in the name issue between Athens and Skopje needs to be implemented. Belgrade-Pristina. Let me clarify one important point. It's a myth to think that bilateral issues cannot be resolved and should be best placed under quarantine. All it takes is political will, lots of courage, and also a certain spirit of compromise. The Austrian presidency undertook a number of initiatives to strengthen the EU's policy engagement with the regions in certain key areas. After our informal foreign ministers meeting, the so-called Gymnich, 31st of August, I invited all EU and Southeastern European foreign ministers for a lively debate on our common future. A week ago in Tirana, together with Albania's foreign minister Stitmir Bushati, we organized a conference for the 6 Southeast Europe and EU integration ministers. It aimed to introduce a new format for closer cooperation between the accession candidates. Nevertheless, bilateral disputes stand in the way for full cooperation, and we still see the glorification of war criminals, and we see hate speech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. We're discussing EU enlargement today with renewed acumen. This is good, but breakthroughs are overdue. The people of the region deserve a future with perspectives. They should be able to profit and contribute to the integration of the European Union, not only by emigrating to EU member states, but by staying in the regions and making those prosper. Their youth is bright, talented, eager to learn. Soils are fertile. The scenery is spectacular. It all could work out. The key to success is politics. Basic political decisions conceived in an interplay between people and their elected leaders. It's also up to the latter to take the hand stretched out by the European Union. This means implementing decisive reforms. The EU is about rule of law, democracy, freedoms, economic prosperity. Opting for the EU means being serious with regional reconciliation and cooperation. Geography does not lie. It is time to overcome legacies of the past and bury the hatchets. Others have done it. Peace and prosperity was the result. The history of the European project is an example at stake. I can only repeat that the EU and its presidencies stand up to second the countries of Southeast Europe on their way towards the European Union. But it's a clear shared interest of the entire continent. And I always also say, not only to my colleagues in Southeastern Europe, helping is not a diplomatic category. It's all about seizing a dynamic, seizing opportunities. And here, in the sense of realpolitik, one has to seize the momentum. Thank you very much.
Sehr verehrte Frau Ministerin, vielen Dank für Ihre Worte.
Thank you, Minister, for your words. So interesting to hear you talking about Southeastern Europe instead of the Western Balkans. And so I would like to pass on now to Mr. Thomas Meyer-Harting for his contribution.
Mr. Chair, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by saying if the subject is the perspective for the Western Balkans, then we should remember that this is a region which has a promise of this perspective. 15 years ago, the European Council said in Thessaloniki, the future of this region lies in the European Union. And this is a promise that needs to be honored. And as Madam Minister has just said, this promise was not only made in the interest of the countries concerned, it was made because of our European self-interest. It is clear that the European Union has an interest to extend this zone of peace and stability, which is the product of the process of European integration, to the Western Balkans, a region that lived through bloody wars, through bloodshed, through conflict just 20 years ago. So it is in our interest for this promise to be honored, and it's good that the discussion on the perspective of the Western Balkans has now renewed. And let me also say there is no other country, no other group of countries in Europe that has received a similar promise in these terms. But obviously, if this is to work, if we want to extend this zone of peace and stability, it is also important that the European Union does not import unresolved conflicts. And I can only concur with what Madam Minister said at the end of her statement. And this is why what is happening right now in Skopje and what is happening in the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina is so essential. In the case of Skopje, Skopje and Athens were able to conclude with the dynamic and essential support of the two prime ministers an agreement that is key, and that was supported by a vast majority of those who participated in the referendum in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And this opens a window of opportunity for the country, and it is essential that these agreements are now ratified. This is exactly what is going on right now in Skopje, and I do have to say that cynically it has been said of the region that it rarely misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and this is one of the cases where this could happen. If this agreement, which paves the way to the European path, path of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia is not ratified, the next chance may only be available in years to come, many years to come potentially. The other point I would make is about the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. We've seen interesting and important exchanges on these subjects in recent months, in recent weeks, including here in Austria. And it has also been clear, and this has been a key point of the strategy of the European Commission for the Western Balkans, that there needs to be full normalization, full and complete normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina. For Belgrade, that has been described as a front runner in this process to join the European Union. Even being a front runner, Serbia will only join the European Union once this issue has been resolved. And again, in these recent weeks, too much has focused on one single aspect of the discussions between Belgrade and Pristina, the so-called territorial corrections. What we are looking at is a comprehensive agreement that resolves all the open issues, an agreement that brings stability to the region as a whole, that is supported by the region as a whole, that is supported by the entire European Union, all its member states, that is supported by the international community, and at the end also by the Security Council. And obviously, it is an agreement that should lead to full recognition of Kosovo by Serbia. Now, let me also say that the Minister has already also referred to the decision on opening negotiations with Albania and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia next summer. These were difficult discussions, and I have to say we're very grateful, as in other matters, for the strong support that the European institutions got from Austria and now from the Austrian presidency in this issue. It wasn't easy to get that consensus to start these negotiations at the end of the first half of 2019, but I do have to say it's in the interest of the process, because one of the challenges of the enlargement process of these countries has been that there's not enough competition. It's all very fine to say that Serbia and Montenegro are frontrunners, but to be perfectly honest, in our assessment at this point in time, nobody's running, including the frontrunners. More needs to be done, also by a country like Montenegro that has already opened 31 of the 36 chapters of the negotiation process. And it will be important to have precisely this competition with further participants in this process participating. As I said, we have now this renewed dynamics in the process, and in his State of the Union address already at the end of last year, President Juncker has given the possible perspective of 2025 for membership for the frontrunners, whoever they may be at that point in time, in the European Union. Let me also say a word about Bosnia and Herzegovina and about Kosovo. In the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we've just seen elections, while obviously this remains a very complex country with a complex setup. The elections as such were peaceful. We now hope that the authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina will rapidly form the governments at the various levels to get on with this reform process that also needs to be done. Bosnia has the capacity sometimes to surprise positively. Nobody expected the dynamics behind the process which led to the membership application. Bosnia is now answering thousands of questions in the framework of the AVI process, and this whole process in itself helps Bosnians to concentrate their minds, hopefully, on the European path, but much more work needs to be done. And in the case of Kosovo, of course, what I said about the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina applies in a specific way to Kosovo as well. It is important that political forces in Kosovo unite around this dialogue. In Serbia, in the person of President Vučić, we have a strong authority at the head of this process who is willing to deliver on this important process. In Kosovo, he is supported on the Kosovo side by President Thaci. It is important that all political forces in Kosovo support this process as well. If all of this happens, we will move forward to this perspective of enlargement, resuming with the first new candidates hopefully joining in 2025 or soon after. This is admittedly an ambitious goal, and it will not happen within the next legislature of the European Parliament, but immediately afterwards. But for this to happen, the process needs the support of the countries in the region, it needs the support of member states, and in particular, it also needs the support of parliamentarians, of national parliaments, of the European Parliament as well. The European Commission was very clear in its strategy that the countries in the region have to do a lot of additional work, that they have to promote, that they have to progress in fighting corruption, in moving forward on the rule of law, in moving forward in good governance, because, as the Minister has already indicated, it will also be a challenging sell to our own peoples, to our own countries, to make this enlargement happen. But I think all of you will have the chance to support this process in the years to come, so that 2025 really becomes a date which moves us forward. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Thomas Meyer-Harting.
Thank you very much, Thomas Meyer-Harting. I think we shall pass on now to Ms. Tügelhofer, who is also Austrian, and, as far as I know, will be speaking German. So, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, I also learned English in school because we have a very good educational system here in Austria, but I'm very happy and pleased to be able to use my mother tongue. Madam Minister, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, the Madam Minister referred to the power of words, and I would like to support this idea of referring to the pre-accession states and not speaking about the Western Balkans. So when I use the term Balkans in my presentation here, then this is more a kind of a tradition, and it's not so much my conviction. And it is in this spirit that we should not talk about the European perspective of the countries of Eastern Europe, because there is no doubt that the region is part of Europe. In geographical terms, it may be at the border, at the margin, but in view of all the diversity that you can find there in a very small area, and in view also of the many conflicts of the past, it is a region in the center of what really makes up Europe. Now, in closer terms, I'd like to speak about the EU perspective of the Western Balkan, and it's no longer at its beginning, because actually for 18 years this has been going on and has come of age, so to say. And in view of the fact that the states of the so-called Western Balkans obtained this perspective almost 20 years ago, so you could ask the question whether this is still a timely approach, or whether perhaps this is something left over from the past, left over from times when the EU was more optimistic, perhaps more naive, it was more united perhaps, and not so much absorbed by internal developments. My reply to that is that the accession perspective and the expansion, the enlargement process is just as topical an issue as 2 decades ago, because the main reason for it hasn't changed. The issue is to have stability and economic development, and to support that in this region. I think one really needs to appreciate fully how this accession perspective has contributed to stability in that region and continues to do so. Nevertheless, I have to make one statement. The EU perspective for the countries of the Western Balkans is at a larger distance than many years ago. This may be a contradiction at first sight, because if you look at the association and stabilization process, then it is clear that never before have these countries been so close to the European Union as they are now. And there are many examples that have been given by the speakers before me Montenegro and Serbia already engaged in accession discussions, and Kosovo, which is the last country in the region that could now profit from this liberalization that is finally taking place. And the approximation between Serbia and the Montenegro, this may certainly help to overcome many years of conflict. These are quite spectacular success for the countries and for the European Union, and also for the mediating role that you have played with the common defense and stability policy. Nevertheless, the perspective now is not so tangible for the countries in the Western Balkans than some years ago. The preparations have become more detailed, have become more complicated. So the EU is paying closer attention to what is happening by way of reform. So there are higher demands on the countries concerning the rule of law and also on the solving of conflicts on a bilateral basis. But the process has also become more time-consuming because there's more skepticism concerning accession. We could discuss the reasons for a long time, but it certainly is a fact that there are many countries that are now a little more skeptical or even disillusioned about accession. So this agenda is not promoted and supported to such an extent as it should be, and this slows down the process and does not promote it to such an extent. And then there is one group, and for them the EU perspective is farther away than many years ago, and that's the citizens in the countries of the region. This promise of accession has been used and referred to very often and very frequently, but in many central areas of their lives, citizens could not find out whether anything had changed. 19 years of coming closer to the European Union has not brought more prosperity to people, and their experience is also that many of the politicians that should pursue their interests are only pursuing their own interests. They're using the official institutions for their private purposes, and that they work into their own pockets. From a day-to-day basis, citizens find out that there are no binding rules applicable for each and every one, and they also find out that certain rights and certain opportunities will be open to them only if, and I quote, they belong to the right party or were born into the right family, unquote. Now, you could say this is nothing new. These are not new developments. These problems have existed for a long time. But what has changed in recent times is that many people have lost the hope and have lost any hope that there will be any positive development in their countries. And this perspective of coming closer to the European Union and the perspective of becoming a member of the European Union does not change. And this is why this EU perspective is becoming even further remote and is actually becoming a loss of perspective. And the consequence of that is that at present we have a lot of immigration from these countries. People leave these countries. So what can the European Union and what can parliaments do in order to strengthen this EU perspective and to make it more tangible? Here I have three proposals. First of all, the progress in the negotiations must follow the accession criteria. This may sound banal, but we can see here two contradictory trends. On the one hand, you cannot but get the impression that stability and geopolitical considerations are more important than political reforms and determine the speed at which a country is moving forward in this accession process. And then we see, and we've seen this only recently, that accession countries are delivering reforms but are not moving on to the next step. So these two trends create uncertainty as to what criteria really count in the accession process, and this creates the impression of a certain arbitrariness, and This is why people do no longer believe so fervently in this strategy. Secondly, the valuation of the reform must be communicated clearly to the citizens in the region, and this is not the case so far. The annual reports that are being reported are very detailed, which is positive, but they use a very complicated language. They're written in a very complicated language, so you cannot get an overall picture. So it's difficult for me to understand how the citizens in the countries concerned should be able to find out whether their politicians have done a good job in promoting accessions. And thirdly, and this is the final point, the EU needs more courage to put its approach on another level. And what we need here, first of all, is a new urgency in the enlargement process. You could get the impression that because this enlargement perspective has been around for such a long time and the accession of a new country is not about to happen tomorrow, the impression is that people have lots of time. And I think that's a very wrong delusion, because there are other actors in the area, China, Russia, Turkey, and they're very active in the region, and they're not waiting for the EU to be ready for anything. And on the other hand, the people there in the region do not have any more time and are about to lose patience. And these two factors contain a lot of potential for destabilization. And if the EU wants to counter these trends, it has to act now and should not wait anymore. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to thank all three of our distinguished speakers for their introductory remarks. I would now like to open the floor for an exchange of views with all of you. May I please remind you that Minister Kneißl has to leave at 12:30, so what we would probably do is that we take the first speakers, and then Minister Kneißl can give her answers, and then when she's left, we still have the two other panelists to debate. Try and be as brief and concise as possible, because there are so many colleagues who would like to take the floor. We start with Tonino Picula from Croatia, European Parliament.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panelists. Enlargement has been one of the most successful European Union policies, expanding the area of democracy, peace and prosperity on our continent. It goes without saying that EU membership remains the best way to promote reform and cooperation in the Western Balkans, as well insurance policy for the European Union itself. It should be a twofold process. European Union has to build up confidence to Western Balkans countries, and Western Balkans countries must keep trust to European Union accession abilities. But when it just looked like the 6 Western Balkans countries were back in the focus due to Commission's enlargement strategy containing accession perspectives which are taking a more concrete shape and timeline, the Council and some Member States shattered the illusion. Current context is rock. State of play is unique. For the first time, the European Union is negotiating an exit with one member state, while at the same time is negotiating an accession with the Western Balkans candidate countries. Another important question arises. Are processes of European integration and enlargement identical or separate processes? The answer are blurred. Today, in a time of deep crisis of multilateralism, Western Balkans is hard to set a true priority for the European Union. According to relevant analysis, at least 18 points of disputes are still live on the Balkans. For too long, the European Union has tried to manage these challenges rather than assist to resolve them. European perspective for the Western Balkans offer the EU a leading role in the region. At present, Russia, Turkey, Gulf states, as well as China, are competing with each other and the European Union for economic and political influence in the Western Balkans. If the European Union dishonors its own promises and commitments, discarding the possibility of accession, many Western Balkan citizens will be disappointed, and other powers less attached to our values of democracy and fundamental rights might take advantage. The truth is, it was easier to establish European Economic Community in the 50s of the last century than enter the European Union in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. That was nearly within the 2-minute framework. The next is Mr. Fassino from, no, sorry, our co-host, Mr. Shida, please.
Thank you. Just some quick remarks. Beside the name of the region, also, I originally thought it's simply the Balkan, but anyway, I think we have to underline that the whole region, and this means also every single state of the region, belongs to Europe and therefore also should have a European Union perspective. Secondly, I think most states share in different ways but the same problems. This is lack of institutional reform, economic reforms, and also, of course, strengthening the rule of law and all kind of this issue. The future membership of the EU can be a motor to help to have this reform, but on the other side, we have also to say integration is also a question which every state themselves has to solve. We also see on the other side 3 regions which are, I think, crucial. The one is the Macedonia name question, which is hopefully solved now. The second one is the Serbian-Kosovo question, where I think it's extremely important that both states themselves solve also this question in order to have more contact. And the third is this slightly complicated political system of Bosnia, which seems to be a bad answer to a great question. On the other side, we have also to say there had been big reforms, like in Albania, like in Serbia, like in Macedonia, and therefore I think the European Union must help and must be always open, but also we have to tell all countries that they have also to make their own steps to solve the problem, especially in the region which is in the interstate context.
Thank you, Andreas Shida. And now, Mr. Fassino, prego.
Sì, grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. 25 years ago, when Dayton put an end to the war, the international community said that Euro-Atlantic integration was the fundamental element to guarantee peace and stability to a region that has never enjoyed them. And the Austrian minister proposed we should use the term Southeast Europe rather than West Balkan. And actually, we used the term Balkanization to refer to a situation of permanent conflict. And 25 years ago, we said that Euro-Atlantic integration would be the framework to provide stability to that region. So I agree with what Professor Togliafer said. The risk is that after 25 years, if we do not provide a clear perspective and a clear timeline, we risk progressive frustration within public opinion and governments, and this would slow down their integration process. The Macedonian issues are evident. The contradictory electoral results in Bosnia point to what the problems are. And so what can we do to ensure that 2025 will be a veritable deadline, at least for some countries? How are we working? And this is my question to Mrs. Kneißl. How can we provide a clear timeline so that the states will make the reforms that are needed?
Okay, and then Ms. Kneißl will answer the first 4 remarks. This is Mr. Canas from Portugal.
Yes, thank you. I'm here. Thank you very much. Let me voice a position coming from the other end of Europe. We support enlargement. We would support the integration of Turkey, but Turkey seems to be moving away. It's a pity. And we support enlargement to the southeastern European countries, because it will be a key factor for stabilization of that region and also a way of strengthening Europe itself. We must have clear criteria. Europe should not change criteria, and sometimes we hear people saying that we must wait, we must see, we must make something else, but we must have very clear criteria, because we must avoid frustration of those countries. Of course, southeastern countries will have the strongest role here, because they have to do the reforms needed. Sometimes it seems that southeastern countries think that they have to do reforms only because of the European integration. But reforms are required for their own interest. And reforms must conviction, not only because they are needed for European integration, but because they are needed. Governance reforms, corruption fighting, rule of law, and so on, reforms are needed. Also, we need to, European Union, we need to see a strong option and a strong choice, because sometimes also we see other third parties playing a card. It was already mentioned here. We see China, Russia, Middle East countries trying to play a card, and sometimes we feel that the positions of those candidates of this country, of this region, are not strongly enough, and they should be strong enough to Europe and not to other partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear colleague. Minister Kneißl, the floor is yours to reply to the first 4 remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the deputies. First of all, un grande grazie al deputato Fassino per sue parole di confermazione della mia terminologia. Balkanization, Balkans, and Andreas Schieder also spoke about, you always spoke of Balkans just. I don't see Balkans as such as a derogatory term, but Western Balkans, in my reflection, is an artificial term, which I simply think doesn't make sense. But of course, Balkanization, as Mr. Fassino has pointed out, has always had this negative connotation, and for that simple reason already I think one can discard it from the debate. I tried to find out when was Balkanization first used in political dialogue science, and if my research is correct, it was Mr. Rathenau, a former German Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Weimar Republic, and he did that in an interview, I think it was with New York Times or some US paper, and he then referred to the US financial market of the 1920s. So Balkanization being negative, always alluding to imploding, to dismembering, and that's one of the many reasons why I personally prefer to speak of Southeast Europe, as I have highlighted before, and I also thank the other speaker, Madame Töschläger, that you also consider it as useful. I would like to come back to the vacuum situation and geopolitics. When I grew up in the 1980s as a student and had the privilege to study also in France, I remember very well the mantra of the French discussion on on then European integration and enlargement. It was always d'abord approfondir, après élargir. So we always had the debate on the institution building and promoting, and then going beyond that. I remember very clearly President Mitterrand's attitude towards the need for bringing in Greece, Portugal, and Spain against the backdrop of their then recent history. And it was the French who very often pushed for that. So when I speak to my French counterparts, then I also come back to, it's all about geopolitics. It's about this very clear aspect of who will move in, and it has been highlighted beforehand that there are many other actors who are already in there, who maybe are not in terms of clear-cut investment as important as European money that goes in there. And then in Brussels we discuss communication strategy and how we can better sell the communication. But sometimes you also have to go into literature, and having read, for instance, Miloš Černianski's book on Bora, which is a kind of Tolstoy epic on how the Serbs have been, the Serb narrative has been about being treated, in particular then by the Austrians in 18th century, it goes into emotions, it goes beyond money, it goes into who has been helpful for us at certain instances in history. So it's not only about the money, the communication, the different offices, and I think this also has to be taken into due account. And talking about the various actors that are there, my observation has been it's in first and foremost and in the long run, what will be decisive is the People's Republic of China, because they really have a strategy. They do have a plan when it comes to moving up in terms of infrastructure from the eastern Mediterranean, container ports going across Greece into Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and then into Central Europe, etc. So I think here definitely we have an issue at stake, and this, as far as I have been observing, also how EU funds have been given to certain big projects, such as the bridge to connect the Dalmatian coast from Bosnia-Herzegovina to Croatia. We speak here about more than 500 million euros tax money. Who got the tender? A Chinese company that is subcontracting beyond its own prices that it had been offering to other companies. So here we are definitely in a delicate situation, and here I would like to see also much more sensitivity about what is going on the level of geopolitics and on the level of what all that means also for tenders. And this is something I think that still needs to be highlighted in order to sum up what has been said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Kneißl. We fully understand that you have to leave now because you have an important visitor. Is it the Dutch Foreign Minister?
My colleague, the Dutch, and every visitor is important.
So the Dutch Foreign Minister is visiting Vienna, so we understand that you now have to leave. Once again, on behalf of us all, thank you for attending our conference. So. So, and now I'm delighted to give the floor to the one and only Eduard Kukan from the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, the most distinguished Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the speeches of all speakers in this panel. That was yet another clear demonstration that Austria is the country which has vast, deep and rich experience in the Southeast Europe. From now on, I'm going to use the terminology of Madam Minister. Southeast Europe, it's more European and more encouraging for our partners. Thank you, Thomas, reminding us about the Thessaloniki promise that all the countries which were represented there, aspiring candidate countries, will find themselves in the European Union. When? Inshallah. No, not inshallah. Now we know that 2025. I will still defend the title of the conference because, yes, the countries are in Europe, but we are speaking about a European Union perspective, so I think we should still use it. One remark I would like to make. When we look at the political situation in the countries, in the region, and its development, there are several difficult issues which are facing us now. We should take them in one package because they are all very much interconnected. If we succeed, if there is a positive vote in Skopje on Monday concerning the constitutional changes which have to be adopted in accordance with the Prespa agreement, I think it will be a great encouragement for the whole region. Yet it works both sides. If we fail I think it will be dramatically negative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and all other countries in the region. So I think that we should be aware of that, all European institutions and all individuals, and we shall contribute that we are successful and the European perspective for the countries is still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward Kukan. And now I give the floor to Mr. Joško Klisović from Croatia. Molim.
Thank you, Chairman. The EU must provide continued intensive attention and assistance to Southeast Europe if we want that area to really become an area of prosperity, area of high democratic standards, an area which will meet all necessary conditions to join the European Union. And all of the countries really want to join the European Union. And what we have on the ground? We have Army of Serbia in the state of high alert due to the relations with Kosovo. We have low turnout on the referendum in Macedonia, on the key issue for the progress of the country and accession talks, commencement of the accession talks with the European Union. And we had recently elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were conducted in clear contravention to the decision of the Constitutional Court to bring in line rules which regulate elections with the constitution of that country. We know responsibility lies on the nations and states in the region, but has the European Union done enough to prevent this kind of situation? We are proud of Europe being an area of democratic values and rule of law, as the Madam Minister said. But in our vicinity, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as I said, we had recently elections which were conducted in contradiction to rule of law. So it was completely neglected, the constitutional decision of the Constitutional Court of that country, to bring in line election rules with constitution. And these amendments should have ensured equality of all three constituent nations in election process. So Bosnia and Herzegovina, therefore, now is heading to constitutional crisis, political crisis, and the blockage, possible blockage of federal and state institutions. So it's unrealistic to really hope that the transition of power will go smoothly. And what the EU should do? The EU should continuously advocate rule of law. Because if we don't do that, the seed of new conflict is planted. The protests in Mostar have already started. So my question is now, what will be the realistic position of the European Union vis-à-vis elections, decision of the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the unfolding crisis in that state? Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague. Next speaker is Mr. Lipavsky from the Czech Republic.
So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this great debate. I would like to reiterate the importance of this topic of the Western Balkans for the whole Europe. Basically, the Western Balkans is inside European Union, and our presence there is a critical to our interest. And I think there is a lot of speak about the enlargement, but we don't have to forget about the hard security issue, about the keeping peace, which is still actual. But I have one big problem with the enlargement. It's a bureaucratic process. It's not a political one, and we should start looking for the political tools, how we can help Western Balkans to come more to Europe. And we can see it as a Russian influence, as a Chinese influence, as a Turkey influence, as a Saudi Arabia influence in Western Balkans. They all use political tools. And even though European Union is putting a lot of money into Western Balkans, since it's not a political motivated, the other monies are much more visible. So I think we need to start looking for different approaches to Western Balkan countries, to offer them something which will really make a change, which will make European Union more visible. And of course, in the end of the day, we have the ultimate win, which is the accession to EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Konstantinos Douzinas from Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an extremely important session because the Prespa agreement between Greece and Fyrom is perhaps the only success of European foreign policy recently. So to this extent, we hope and wish that all of you, colleagues, will put pressure on the opposition parties, both in Greece and Fyrom, to approve and help the ratification of the agreement. However, I would like to take this opportunity to raise a couple of more general issues. This is the last plenary session of our conference, which was normally dedicated to a debate on a general political issue or issues and the adoption of conclusions. This did not happen. The Southern European parliaments have expressed our displeasure about this, which undermines the political nature of our conference and moves it towards a technocratic direction. We hope, Mr. Chairman, you are growing into the shoes of your predecessor, and therefore we are going to have you as the chair for many years to come, that you will reinstate the conclusions and the final political debate next year. There is a second faux pas. The Austrian presidency, through a number of measures, directed some particular composition of the conference, which led the Spanish and the Cypriot delegation to leave our conference. This is very sad. And again, we hope that it does not mean that somehow the views of certain states impose themselves upon others. We know the concern all over Europe about the rise of extreme right wing, about the rise of xenophobia and even racism. We hope that this will not raise its head in this conference. We heard some of these things yesterday, and we hope that the rule of law, solidarity, and social justice will again return to where it belongs, the heart of Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Douzinas. Partly you weren't addressing Southeast European issues, but general questions. I guess that at the end of this session, the Austrian presidency might be able to answer. And on the conclusions and the statement, I can also say something at the end of this conference in exactly 19 minutes, if that's okay with you. Now, we'll try and go through a few more of our speakers. The next one is Mr. Dumitrescu from Romania.
Thank you very much. The Balkans country represent for Romania one of the most important opportunity, and for this reason will be promoted in forthcoming presidency of the EU Council on the first semester of 2019, in order that the accession of the EU to EU of the countries from the region within a reasonable time frame will be a priority. I want to say at the same time that we think that focus on the compatibility of various regional initiatives under the European perspective of the region would be very important for us, and for this reason we are introduced a term regarding the Danube policy, and will be a very good moment to prove that with this it is really possible. Regarding the entry of the new country from the Western Balkans, our position will be that the assessment of each candidate and potential candidate country should be carried out individually and on the basis of its own merits, respecting the existing and agreed criteria. At the same time, we need to give to our colleague and to our partners a roadmap more exactly for the future in this field. In the same time, I agree to say that, in my opinion, EU has strong roots on this policy of solidarity, and it's not only my opinion, because it is inside from the very beginning of the treaties. And for this reason, I want to say that our colleagues and partners from the Balkans country, Western Balkan countries, must understanding, yes, must understanding, for us is more important to remain at the same table than a flag remain or not on the table.
Mulțumesc. The next speaker is Jelena Zovko from the European Parliament from Croatia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I would like to say how sorry I am that Madam Minister has left the conference, because I wanted to correct one fact, that Croatia is not building the bridge from Bosnia and Herzegovina to Croatia, but from connecting its territory. So it's building the bridge from Croatian territory to Croatian territory. And I want to raise serious concern of Croatia to a menacing threat by the newly elected president by majority of Bosniak votes in Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there was a serious breach of Dayton Peace Agreement, the Washington Peace Agreement. So we had a protest yesterday in Mostar. A large community of Croats are disfranchised, and they are unhappy with the fact what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And to you, Mr. General Director, I would like to say that I'm really disappointed with your estimation that everything is fine in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nothing is fine. I think we have a serious situation when, with menacing threats from the country to European external borders. And we have problems as well before the establishing of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the regional security is at stake. So I would like to have answers. What is External Action Service, what is going to do in order to have these things regulated? And what European Union as a whole, what image is projecting without having all these facts out? In 1992, I went as a refugee when the war broke out in former Yugoslavia to Great Britain. And it took us a while to explain what is going on in Yugoslavia when they were all thinking that Milosevic was protecting Yugoslavia. I'm witnessing the same things happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jelena Zovska. And now we have somebody speaking from a candidate country. From Montenegro, Mr. or Mrs. Nikolic. Mr. Nikolic.
Thank you, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today Montenegro is in the final phase of the EU accession in the time when the Union itself is facing serious internal challenges. We in Montenegro understand very well the need of the EU to carry out its internal reforms, but we think that the internal consolidation shouldn't stop or slow down the enlargement process. It seems to us that there is no better perspective for the European Union than the full unity and further enlargement. We also think that these processes can take place together. Therefore, the new energy in the enlargement policy is a key factor for the long-term sustainability of the European unity, but also for maintaining and boosting integration enthusiasm of the Western Balkans. We want to believe that the new EU enlargement strategy for the Western Balkans also means the new energy in promoting the idea of European integration. Dear colleagues, Montenegro already acts as a member of the EU in terms of harmonization with the EU common foreign and security policy. We join the common positions of the EU without exception, regardless of the pressures that we suffer in this sense. I assure you that Montenegro will successfully address all challenges in the upcoming section of its European road. With partnership understanding of the friendly EU countries and through cooperation with the Union institutions, we will be able to fulfill our obligations and thus join the European family of nations even before the deadline set in the new strategy. I would like to urge you, parliamentarians from the EU member states, to influence on preserving the EU enlargement vision ahead of the elections for the European Parliament. Help us to prevent some destructive voices from endangering the stability, the Western Balkans, and European future of our region. The European Union has been the best model for emancipation and modernizing of all our policies. Therefore, Montenegro will give its best to become a new EU member state in the near future, because we firmly believe in the idea of Europe that is united in diversity. There is no stable Europe without a stability in the Western Balkans. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. The next speaker is from the Netherlands, Ms. Jani Blietstra.
Correct, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, there you are.
Here I am. The Western Balkans belong, in our opinion, to Europe, no doubt about that. And I agree that this is both our interest and the interest of the Balkan Westerns. And together it's a long way and a hard job to do for the Western Balkan countries in the field of democracy, human rights, good governance and economy, and for the EU countries to support them fully in that process. I share the fear of the last speaker that the process is going on slow. And what bothers me is the growing influence of big countries like China, Russia and Turkey in and on the Western Balkans. And that brings me by my questions to both the speakers left. What are, in their opinion, what is, in their opinion, the influence of China, Russia and Turkey at this moment, and what do they expect in the future? And what are the consequences, in their opinion, for the accession process? And finally, is there a need for us as EU member states to give more support to the accession process than we give at this moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Val. And now I have a slight challenge. Theoretically, I would have to close the list of speakers now because I want to give some time to our guests to answer all their questions. On the other hand, 5 colleagues still want to speak. If you could try and keep it to 1 minute, is that possible? Then all 5 can speak. So the next one would come from our friends from the UK. And we're still so sad to see them go. Please, go ahead. Can you use them?
Yeah, we've got it sorted out. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can I commend the final panellist, actually, who talked about the fact that the EU needs courage, and also mentioned the other actors, as a previous questioner did, who are currently involved in the Western Balkans. I'd like to say, as far as I'm concerned, the EU is a force for good, full stop. The EU is a particular force for good in southeastern Europe. And I hope the southeast of Europe has a future in the European Union, as I hope the UK has a future in the European Union as well. Can I ask a question of the panellists? What more can be done to show a little bit of European solidarity in the south of Europe? What more can be done to promote the rule of law? We've heard a number of questions about the rule of law. And finally, and this builds on the previous question, how do we deal with the growing role, particularly of Russia in the area? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, for 1 minute, a speaker from Romania, Mr. Costoiu. Please.
Beautiful accent, President. I have 4 points. First, it's very important.
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. It's very important to understand what's happening in each country. Second, in our opinion, it's more important to help this country, not criticize too much this country. 3, we know the history and we know the intervention of non-EU country in the region. We know Croatia is now a member of the European Union. It's very important to continue discussion with Serbia, Montenegro and Bosnia-Herzegovina without, in our opinion, undue unnecessary conditioning. 4, it's very important, in our opinion, to create a system to realize a close relation with the European Union. Last, but not the least, I mention again the position of our colleague Dumitrescu. It's very important, same table, and the Austrian message, the minister message, it's very important, the moment.
Thank you. And now, for una minuta, Mr. Castaldo from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Chair. 15 years after the Thessaloniki summit, EU accession process for Southern Eastern Europe is again a top agenda priority, and that's very good. That's why I believe that in this historical phase, it's even more essential for us to reaffirm our unequivocal commitment for the European integration. We know that there are still many challenges that we need to be dealt with, such as resolution of bilateral disputes, and we know as well that Some interesting processes are ongoing and must be fully supported by us as an opportunity. But we have also unemployment, population decline, brain drain phenomenon, and the need for a full alignment to the acquis. We should seize this positive momentum by actively supporting these countries in their accession process, and we should balance carefully our help and our remarks, always in a constructive manner. The goal and the challenges, they are ambitious and maybe risky, but inaction for us as European Union and status quo are even riskier. If we lose this momentum, we will lose our credibility in the region, as well as our unique position to transform the region, by also opening a vacuum that could be easily filled by other powers. China has a vision. Others have a vision. It's time to roll up our sleeves and work together towards our common European future. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Second last speaker, Ms. Tsigane from Latvia.
Yes, here.
Please.
Thank you. I believe that the fact that Mr. Harting mentioned that it's very important that the Western Balkan countries have a firm determination to integrate with the European Union is very, very important. And coming from the Baltics, we learned it very well during our accession both to NATO and the EU. If you are thrown out of the door, you come through the window. If you are thrown out of the window, you come through the chimney, and so you continue until you join. So I wish the same determination to our West Balkan colleagues. But I was a bit surprised that the fact that the Balkans is also a platform of big geopolitical interest was mentioned only by the last keynote speaker. I'm happy that many speakers raised the issue of Russian meddling and influence, and I would like both remaining panelists speak about that in extent of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally from Slovenia, Mr. Nemec.
Hello, all of you. Yeah, Slovenia is a Central European country. First of all, first country of the region being part of the European Union, Monetary Union, Schengen, and so on. So we are doing by the book everything. Slovenia hardly support the further enlargement of the EU, but on this basis, full respect of the values of their implementation. Such as common values are expected and provide the ground of stability and prosperity. We believe that the respect of rule of law is essential. So we have no open issues with all our neighbors except Croatia, of course. The Arbitration Tribunal in 2015 decided, and actually our neighbors, which we during the history have a very good relations, refused to implement the judgment, saying that had withdrawn from the arbitration in 2050 after Slovenia violated the terms of process. But actually, if we have two countries being part of the European Union, not able to resolve the kind of issues, what kind of perspective can we give to the member states of the region? What kind of perspective can we give if we have two countries unable to resolve their own issues? Thank you.
So thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a wide range of questions. We have decided that first Ms. Türkelhofer will speak for 5 minutes, and then Mr. Meyer-Harting, and then we will try and conclude this conference more or less on time. Bitte sehr, Sie haben das Wort.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much. In a number of comments, the question was raised what the EU can do to continue supporting the accession process and to do it differently than before. And I think that's really important. Let's not forget that the EU is demanding a lot from the countries in the Western Balkans and must continue to ask more. But they should also promote them, and should promote them systematically, more so than has been the case so far. Here, there are many ideas of what could be done. It begins with the promoting of infrastructure projects, economic development. I think that a very realistic proposal would be to increase EU's leverage in the region, that you actually connect and link successful reforms to financial benefits. Another point is the exchange of young persons, which is taking place, but more on a symbolic level. I think it would be important to do this on a broader basis and this relates also to other areas of politics. Here you get the impression that much is being done on a symbolic level, but the issue is how could you exert a systematic influence with these actions. So you really have to look at what remains of the many measures and projects, etc., really arrives and produces an effect. Another question that one can think about is how the brain drain of the region could be turned into official migration, and how you could contribute that the know-how that the migrants will bring with them can be used to further develop the region. All of these things could be discussed, should be discussed, because they have a lot of potential. I would say it's not only a question of money. Of course, money is always at stake, and the funding for all these projects. But the main issue is really that we boost this awareness that the goals are not only pursued on a pro forma basis, but that they are also instilled with some life. And the specific proposal for the rule of law and promoting the rule of law, here I would say that the EU should look very closely at the situation. And here in recent years, this plan was further developed. And I think that all players, so also the parliaments, here we would need a very open discussion where there are deficits. But I think also that the EU needs clear criteria when requirements are met, and that they communicate it in one voice to the accession states, so there is not a cacophony of different requirements and demands, and in the long run there is some confusion. And then at the end, I would like to refer to one point, namely that parliaments are also called upon to act, and this means the image of the region within the EU. Time and again, we can hear statements that the Western Balkan states cannot be trusted, and there are stubborn cliches that these are very corrupt countries. They will never satisfy the reform requirements. And I think with this assumption, you are really being too general, and you underestimate the possibilities that you have to influence the development in the region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. de Gloff. I think you raised a number of issues, and it was very interesting to hear your most recent evaluation of the situation in these countries.
Mr. Chair, I think I already said quite a lot in my introductory remarks on the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and on the situation in Skopje and in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. It's clear I agree with the speakers who've said what I said myself, that this is a key moment for the country, and it is essential that the country takes the right decision now, and parliamentarians of all political families, by the way, can help decisively at this moment. I wanted to start, and I'll return to Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1 minute. I wanted to start out with the remarks you made, or somebody made, about Brexit and enlargement. First of all, let me say that the United Kingdom has been a particularly positive force when it comes to our relations with the Balkans, and under this angle it is a particular pity that the United Kingdom will be leaving us. On the other hand, there was a link, in my opinion, between Brexit and the new dynamics in the enlargement vis-à-vis Southeastern Europe, vis-à-vis the Western Balkans. The High Representative, Mrs. Mogherini, and President Juncker have been perfectly clear in saying that the European Union will not end up at staying at 27. And I think this new willingness to look at new memberships, the date of 2025, there's a clear link with the discussion on Brexit that we have as well. And let me also say about this issue of how to deal with deepening and enlarging. I have to say, as an Austrian diplomat, and I can only concur with what Foreign Minister Kneißl said, we were confronted with this own discussion when Austria was a candidate for membership in the European Union. At the time, there were those who said one has to do deepening first and then enlarge. And it's true that the European Union has to be prepared for the challenge of enlargement. The European Union has to have the absorption capacity to deal with new members. The European Union needs to do structural reforms, but it is also true to say that accepting relatively small new members like the countries of the Western Balkans is less of a challenge than other enlargements might present the European Union with. I think in reality the European Union has been quite good at promoting these exercises in parallel. And let me also say that enlargement treaties are legal instruments that change primary law of the European Union. So in fact that the enlargement process itself allows for the possibility to deal with aspects of deepening that admittedly have to be dealt with before enlargement can take place. A number of speakers spoke about the role of other actors in the region, and Russia in particular, China, Turkey were mentioned. It is true that you see this increasing activity. You also see an issue with cybersecurity. You see tendencies of disinformation which are disquieting. And it's interesting, you all know these public opinion polls. If you ask, for instance, the population in Serbia, who is the greatest supporter also in economic terms of Serbia, people will answer, many people will answer Russia. And this clearly points to the fact that we have a problem with our communication policy, because the data are obviously not that way. And it's clear that we have to extend strategic communication in a way that we're doing it vis-à-vis our eastern neighbors more intensively to the Western Balkans as well. But we also have to say that logically, it's not that the countries of the region have a choice of either or. We have this discussion of binary choices in some other parts of our neighborhood, but in reality, take the example again of Serbia, for instance. Approximately 2/3 of the trade of Serbia are within the European Union, with the European Union, and I think 5 to 6% of Serbia's foreign trade is with Russia. So I mean, there are real data which speak in favor of integration with the European Union as well. And speaking of China, it's true that the One Belt, One Road initiative is challenging also with regard to developments in the region. Others have spoken of the Piraeus, Belgrade, Budapest link, but you also have to see how this cooperation, this important cooperation, is organized. It's about providing loans. It's about providing, as China has done in other parts of the world, infrastructure projects which are run by Chinese companies. I mean, the whole issue of public procurement is completely different in this case than in the case of the European Union. And if these loans are not repaid, the infrastructure projects become property of China or Chinese companies involved in it. So clearly, I mean, the European Union has a type of engagement in the region that is not comparable to the engagement of any other actor. It's for the long haul, and it's for basically, with partners who are meant to become members of one and the same family. Let me say about Bosnia and Herzegovina, I'm not aware that I said that everything is fine in Bosnia and Herzegovina. What I did say is that Bosnia and Herzegovina is an extremely complicated country with complicated structures, etc., but that it has been able in the past to surprise us from time to time positively. Let me, for instance, look at the reform of the penal code, where politicians from all ethnic groups in Bosnia were actively involved, Croat politicians in particular. I think this was a success. Look at the opinion, look at the accession, the demand for accession, which was promoted by the outgoing member of the state presidency, Mr. Čović, very actively. Bosnia and Herzegovina is delayed with its reform process. It is delayed also in particular with the reform of its electoral code, and this clearly has to be a priority of the next government, and hopefully this government can be formed quickly. But I also have to say that the members of the European Union, including neighbors, including Croatia, can play a very positive and important role in keeping Bosnia on track and faster, hopefully, than in the past towards the European Union. Finally, 2 points. I do have to say, one of the complications of EU enlargement is that it's more complicated than joining NATO. Joining NATO goes fast. Joining the European European Union is a long and complex process. Many have asked, how can we encourage the countries in the region to go through this long and partly very painful process? And I can only say, obviously, the answer of the Latvian parliamentarian was very good. They should insist and they should continue. But I can also agree fully with what my fellow panelists said. If there is progress, it has to be recognized by the European Union and its member states. And if you look, for instance, at the case of Albania, which has gone through a very profound judicial reform, which is doing a re-vetting system of its complete justice sector, this is something that practically no one else in the region has done in the same way. We believe that these very profound reforms are one of the key arguments for opening negotiations with Albania this summer. And you know how difficult it was to get this done. And to give you another example, I do think, difficult as the situation there is as well, Kosovo has done important reforms in the field of security, in the field of judicial reform, etc. And I think that time is ripe to give them visa liberalization. We have very little encouragement that we can give to Kosovo, and that's one of the few ones on its path. And it's all very fine to say, what can the European Union do to encourage these countries? I mean, as always, we are in this together, the European Union and its member states. And obviously, for the European Union to give a positive answer, the European Union and all its member states have to give a positive answer. So in a certain sense, I can throw back this encouragement to all of you as parliamentarians. I think you should help to make this process move forward as well. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to close this session and already add my closing remarks in order to save time. First of all, I would like to thank our two panelists who stayed until the end of the session for their contributions. I would like to thank you all for your contributions, and allow me to say, as somebody who's very much involved in politics for the Western Balkans, or I've now learned for Southeast Europe, please continue your hard work also in the national parliaments to support these 6 countries who all have a European perspective. And now I would finally like to come back to the statement of Mr. Douzinas. I understand on behalf of some of the other South European delegations. 2 remarks from my side. After we faced problems at our last meeting in Sofia concerning the participation of our guests from Kosovo, and we faced new problems at this conference in Vienna on the same issue, I think we all have to work hard to find a modus vivendi, how we can have our IPC conference with participation of our guests from Kosovo on the one hand, and on the other hand, delegates from Spain, Serbia and Cyprus not having to leave the conference. I think we all have to try and find out how this is possible. We do have formats in Europe where this is possible. In Sofia, the Kosovars left. This time, the Spanish and others left. Perhaps at the next conference in Bucharest, it will be possible that both can stay in peace and harmony. But of course, this will be very hard work. And the second point, on the conclusions, Mr. Douzinas, a lot depends on what the hosting presidency suggests. The European Parliament will facilitate, will support the suggestion of a conclusion or just a statement of the 3 chairs. But allow me to remind you that at our conference in Malta, and this was just 2.5 years ago, we were, let's be very blunt, we were fighting until the last minute if it was able to actually adopt conclusions or not. So the one thing is, if you call on me, we would like a conclusion. That's fine. The other thing is, are we actually able to negotiate and adopt a conclusion. Because of the experiences in Malta, the Estonian presidency were the first one to say, we suggest only a statement because we don't want to have the same thing happening in Malta. Once again, I call on our Romanian hosts, you will find also a modus vivendi, how everyone can sit in a room being happy, and without that we can all adopt conclusions from all our political backgrounds, from the very far left to the very far right, which actually have something to say, which actually have a meaning, and then I'm very happy to offer any support from the European Parliament to actually facilitate these negotiations. I would finally like to thank our Austrian hosts for organizing this conference. I thought we had 2 very good days in Vienna. I know how hard work it is to organize this. So on behalf of us all, a warm thank you to our Austrian hosts, and for the final remarks, our 2 chairmen have the floor. Thank you.
Meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you very warmly for taking part in this conference here. We have, as the Austrian presidency, presented this under a motto of a Europe that protects, and we've covered many of the most current topics in our 3 sessions, which from our point of view are having the greatest impact on the European Union, and we've been able to discuss them with you. Protection of the border, illegal migration, the Syrian conflict, and then the enlargement through the Balkan states. I hope that through this political discussion, notwithstanding which political party you come from, I hope that you will be able to take some important points back home to your own parliaments, and I hope that you also enjoyed your time here outside of the time when we're at the conference together, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you very much.
Thank you also from my side, and also underlining what David McAllister was saying also on the procedural remarks or critics which came up at the end. It was exactly the question why we decided to have a statement and not a conclusion, because it was even not possible to make on a round where we speak about Western Balkans, Southeast Europe, Balkans, or we know the regions, without having all the delegations present in the room, which I think is very sorry. And therefore I think even to have a conclusion which is saying something substantially to the issue would be even more complicated than to keep everybody in the room. Just to say it also, frankly, we offered a lot of also compromises or possibilities in order to solve. I think it is necessary that we as a family of parliamentarians still stick to this, what is necessary. Parliaments comes from the word speaking, and therefore it is necessary that everyone also is able to be part of a discussion where we speak about the region, and every representative of this region should also have the possibility to be here to say it clearly. And the problem was less in the region than in another European region also to say it clearly. Besides this, thank you all for coming. I think we discussed a lot of important things. We have the room for discussion, and we will meet the next time in Romania. So therefore I ask Christian to come out, the leader of the Romanian delegation, also to show us and to introduce the conference next year in Romania.
Thank you very much. I want to say that it will be very complicated in Bucharest regarding conclusion or statement, but it's important in the same time that we have 3 countries have the presidency to decide to put the Balkans, Western Balkans, like a priority of the European Union regarding his policy. and 1.5 years, because Romania has this priority, remaining very important, much important, that finally we adopt only a statement. Thank you very much. First of all, on behalf of the Romanian Parliament, I would like, as head of the delegation, chairman of the Senate Committee of Foreign Affairs, and I think that all of you agree, to thank our Austrian colleagues for the hospitality and for the impeccable way in which they organize this conference. Without or not conclusion, but with a statement, it was a very good organization. Our country we hold the presidency of the EU Council in the first semester of next year. We have the pleasure to invite you to the next CFCP CSDP Interparliamentary Conference, which we will organize in Bucharest on March 7 and 8 next year. We will focus on the most important issues that we discussed during this conference, and we have further developed them constructively. During the Interparliamentary Conference on our country, we emphasize this certain priority which use of great importance both for Romania and the future of the European Union. From this perspective, the Eastern Partnership, for example, which celebrate during our presidency 10 years, and the Western Balkans will be important themes of which our country will focus on. Along with this theme, we will debate on issues regarding the security and defense policy in such a European Union's security strategy in the Black Sea region, the EU strategy on the Danube region, the capacity to mobilize armed force and to develop further opportunity along with further development of PESCO. Romania is very involved and active in the Euro-Atlantic defense structure because we consider the way can be achieve peace, stability, and prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, we will discuss all these themes and we will inscribe them on the agenda in a way to promote a very constructive and solid debate. I am looking forward to seeing you in Bucharest in March next year. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our colleague from Austrian Parliament.